First of all, thank you everyone coming today on this particularly remarkable day. Today is the International Human Rights Day, and we are doing this documentary today and to contribute to the Hong Kong movement and also to remark this incredible day for human rights. And also thank you everyone for coming today and missing the football match today, unfortunately. But yeah, I would love to see as well because England versus France later on. But anyway, yeah, we could make it. Okay, anyway, today we are so glad that we have two honorable guests coming today. One on my left is Jack Herder, and he is a program manager at International Republican Institute based in Warsaw. He specialized in China studies and international finance. Also, he has been working for the Economist Intelligence Unit on Chinese economic initiatives and political developments. So, welcome, Jack. And we also have Thomas, and he is a podcaster, writer, and a filmmaker. And since 2010, he has been doing a weekly podcast called The Agent. And since 2014, he invests most of his time in liberty-oriented video productions. And he was also the winner of the Best International Documentary at 2020 ATEM Festival in Las Vegas. So we have expert of documentary here today. So maybe later we can talk about the theme. And so today's topic is this the fourth way of democratization, information revolution in 21st century? So I changed the topic quite in a hurry because we have a new speaker, and also with the recent movement in China. So I'm thinking that it's a good opportunity to explore this dynamic situation, whether we can consider this could be a surge in democracy, a new wave of democracy in 21st century. So as in the topic, so like the wave of democratization is a term in political science, and it describes there are different waves in history. So today as we are seeing in the movie, the movement in Hong Kong. So maybe this could be a new wave of democracy. Maybe we can talk about this later. So first of all, perhaps if we can have a brief introduction about like our background first, because maybe our audience is not like familiarized with ourselves. So maybe you can start with Jack. Yeah.
Use this, yeah?
Yeah.
Hi everyone. Is not here? Okay, it's not on. Going well. Hi. So my name is Jack Herndon. I work for a little organization called the International Republican Institute, which I know it sounds like it, but it is in fact a nonpartisan NGO based in Washington, D.C. I work here in the Warsaw office. I also work with a team back in D.C. My organization is part of the kind of the democracy promotion apparatus in Washington, D.C. It's not connected to the government at all. But what we do is we focus on actually political parties and political party organization around the world, primarily in the developing world, in order to help people organize and launch campaigns, because we believe that the organized competition for power is fundamentally one of the most important things to democratic societies. So that's what we traditionally focus on. However, I have a slightly different portfolio. I actually focus more on China and China in the world, actually the PRC in the world, and the CCP's tools of influence in democratic societies. The CCP uses these tools of influence in order for that when situations like Hong Kong arise, it's able to do what it wants to do without actually facing any repercussions from people abroad, because it's been able to paralyze our governments and our society from taking punitive steps against it. which I think we can get a little bit more into that discussion later on. So I've primarily focused on programs that try to map China's influence in the world and the effects that it has on democratic societies.
Yeah, definitely. We can talk more about the issues in China and Hong Kong later on in the discussion. What about you, Thomas?
Hello, my name is Thomas. I'm a freelance producer of documentaries, podcasts, books, and whatnot. And everything I do is based around promoting and conserving liberty, promoting freedom, educating people on it, on many different aspects of freedom. And as you've already mentioned, it's like 8 years right now since I've been working mostly on documentary productions, and I even produced one piece about Catalan independence, and I've seen several symbols of Catalan independence in that movie. And 2 years ago, I've directed a short movie. It was 40 minutes, so it's not that short. But it was about Polish parliament, and we also had this notion of, I don't know how to say that correctly, but there was a little theme of Hong Kong in it. But maybe I'll talk more deeply about it later. But basically, all the major parties in Polish parliament were afraid to even say hello, to Hong Kong and say that they support it because it's not binding. There was just a little, initiative to say that basically Poland supports Hong Kong, and it was killed basically in the parliament. So because everyone was afraid of it, and that was part of a different documentary. So basically filming documentaries, and I'm focused on structure, lenses, cameras, monopods, filters, and storytelling techniques. So this is my point.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Yeah, definitely. The things in Poland is the reason why we are doing this series of documentary to educate the public and raise awareness in Poland, particularly for a issue in Asia. So how about let's talk about the movie first, because Thomas, as you are a professional in documentary, so probably would you mind to give some feedback or your thoughts on about the film, this film?
Okay, so I'll be frank. That's the second time I've watched this documentary, and I still have that feeling that it's pretty intense. Sometimes it's even too much. It's too intense. It's too saturated at some point, but it's not very dynamic. What I mean by that is that it starts pretty high and it stays on that level. So it keeps the key of non-stop pounding, drumming and batons and blue water, white water, whatever. It goes like that for almost 2 hours, which is too much. And in my opinion, it's almost the perfect documentary that would show that something new is happening in Hong Kong. And I'm not only talking about political aspects. I mean, this is like the production. This movie is about the pressure that is needed to produce a diamond. But it's not really clear what kind of diamond it will be. So in my opinion, this is not yet finished to some extent. And I'm not saying this is amateur or this is badly made or whatever. No. It's like, I don't know, it's 1 month. I would go back, if that would be my production house, I would go back for a month to the editing table and sort some things out, because there are really beautifully edited scenes which are put next to things that are sketchy, repetitive. And sometimes I had the feeling that if I would add another scene, another 10 more minutes of protests, or if I would cut 10 minutes out of the documentary, it would not make any difference. It would still be the same movie. And I was quite lost, actually. And after watching that movie, I felt that I know less about the protests than I knew before, because before I knew this typical narrative, what happened in 97, 84 before that, right? 97 and everything that happened later. But after watching that movie, I was a little bit confused, a little bit lost. I didn't know where am I actually, and I felt not relocated into that situation. I was dislocated. I felt like I'm dislocated. I couldn't find the balance. I know that sometimes this is the the idea of the directors, of the producers, that they want you to immerse into that situation. They want to throw you in the middle of that fortnight battle, of army, the government against umbrellas, right? And so they want you to feel lost, to feel unarmed, because then you can feel like those people in the movie. But if you want to produce something like that, you need to have a build-up. You need to really think about it. You need to think about the structure of that scene. You cannot just simply start with the high C note and keep it like that throughout 1 hour, 50 minutes or something like that. Bringing more and more cinematic music from all over the place. Because this is, before the Omaha Beach scene in Saving Private Ryan, you need that moment of silence. You know what I mean, right? And in Gladiator, for example, before the huge battle at the very beginning, you need some shots of that slow motion snow falling down, that something's happened. You need that kind of the intro, the kind of situation that, for me, that was something that I would change right away, and then later make some other decisions. But basically, so my first reaction was that I'm pretty lost. And still, I am shocked, I'm appalled by the situation that are being filmed. There's a lot of really good emotional material that's already there in its perfect shape. I wouldn't change one frame. But as I said, there was this pressure that is needed to produce a diamond, and that would be like a perfect documentary, not for folks around the world to explain to them what just happened or what is happening in Hong Kong, but to give that story that, there is a new word in English dictionary, right? Hong Konger. Since something new has happened. The previous generation, or even generation before that, those folks, they just said we are here to make money. We don't really care about politics. But suddenly you have that new generation of people that say, okay, making money is good. But suddenly we have something more in common. So we have like a nation-building story that's happening. And I think this movie misses the mark just a tiny bit. And it would I think it would need several weeks on the editing room to get rid of that, gap.
Yeah. I would just like to. So I think that's a great perspective from the point of view of a documentary maker. If we're looking at the composition of the documentary, I think fundamentally the question we have to ask ourselves is: did it accomplish what it was trying to accomplish? And that was trying to demonstrate the nature of the protests, the nature of the CCP, and when it came up against the democratic movement, how did it actually respond? I mean, they said it in here. Hong Kong was the catalyst. I think that yes, the events in 2019, Hong Kong has been the catalyst in terms of changing perspectives around the world of what the government in Beijing is like and how it is obsessed with control and completely paranoid when it comes to democratic ideals. Did the film do that? I mean, for me, it definitely did. Not that I needed any convincing. You'd have to actually perhaps take a poll of the people in the audience that didn't know anything about Hong Kong before. There's a
thing about Hong Kong before the screening.
So it sounds like we had no minds were changed. Therefore, this is actually we cannot even determine whether or not it accomplished its objective. For me, it told a story on the ground level. I mean, I was having watched it before or having been following it during 2019. Just the news coverage. You'd get some bits and pieces of things that were happening on the ground on Twitter. So this is my first time actually seeing that all put side by side. Perhaps we could have rearranged it in ways where it would have perhaps a greater impact. But even if here's the issue. Even if they made the perfect documentary, what's the likelihood of Sony picking this up? Probably zero. And why is that? It's because Sony still wants to get its documentaries or its other films into China, right? So no matter what, the amount of resources that's going to be dedicated to making the perfect Hong Kong documentary is always going to be limited, and it's always going to be somewhat amateur. Until there's going to be a studio house or a company that's willing to kind of take up that challenge and rebel against or push back against stakeholders and their interest in increasing the margins and maintaining access to the Chinese market. So that just kind of puts a different perspective in terms of, I guess we don't know if it accomplished its objective in terms of changing any minds, but the kind of the obstacles that documentary makers face and activists face when trying to get more support to make better products to get these things out there.
Yeah. First of all, totally agree, both of you, their point of view. And I would like to give a bit more background story of the documentary first, and to be fair to the production team. So first of all, the production team is an independent small team. They don't really have big resources, so that's fair that they don't have like big cinematic effect or great editing team. So mostly what I heard from my conversation with the director is that he did most of the like editing, filming, and also all sort of stuff all together. As you can see on the end credit scenes, like most of it like were his name. So that just to be fair to him, like it's really a small team. So I totally like got point of view. But if they have like a larger budget or more people in the team, definitely this would be a better documentary. And I think in terms of like the plot, I think the director intended to put a lot of like intense scenes in this movie, especially in the later part, because I think he wants to show the audience around the world the first-hand real-life experience in Hong Kong as if we were in the battlefield. So that's why we had a lot of like tear gas shooting, like a baton or like the drums effects. So to make the whole movie a bit intense. So yeah, for me it was quite intense as well. So I was like a bit tired after the movie, so I had to take a break. But yeah, I think that's what his intention. But yeah, that would be great if we could have the director here today. But unfortunately,
It sounds like you have a consultant though. It's ready to work.
yeah, definitely we can arrange it. Like if you want to meet the director, I can arrange it with you. But yeah, because actually today we have 3 screenings around the world for the same documentary. One in UK Brighton and the other one in Canada Toronto. So the director he cannot like do the like Q&A section like simultaneously in 3 places. And also, unfortunately, because of this documentary, he has to claim asylum in the UK. He cannot travel to Poland. So that's why, yeah, we can't have him today. And it is also echoing to what Jack said, like it's very difficult to documentary makers to make such kind of documentary because you will face a lot of consequences after doing this. So he's like a real life case. Our director, he cannot go back to Hong Kong because of doing this documentary. So do you want to?
To be fair, I think that this is a perfect, very beautiful, well-made, coherent second draft. Okay, that's it. I'm not saying to make it again in Hollywood and hiring Alex Gibney to direct it for Netflix or Disney. No, nothing like that. I'm saying this is pretty well-made, convincing second draft. Number 5 should be the screening final version. This is number 2. So it's it's there, and the materials are already there. I'm not talking about adding new Godzilla, sci-fi, 3D, whatever, 5 surrounding sound. I'm not talking about this. Tiny details, and I'm all for it. I mean, it's a great material. That's it. I'm not attacking it in any shape or form.
I didn't mean to say that you were, but perhaps you could make. I don't want to get too meta about this documentary itself as well. But what if the unrelenting violence is actually and how exhausting it is for the audience member is part of the kind of the experience of itself is almost theatric, almost. I don't know how I forget the word for something clever there, but
okay.
Okay. This
I know.
It's important. This I don't just go in circles.
Yeah. So perhaps let's move on to the next topic. Yeah, we have talked a lot about the documentary. So let's go back to our topic today. So we are going to talk about the movement. So in the movie, it mentions something like Hong Kong is a catalyst for the democratic movement, like to alarm the world what the CCP or the dictators around the world is doing. So, so my question is, do you think that like Hong Kong or maybe the protests before Hong Kong, like the one happened in Ukraine, inspired the protests in Hong Kong, and then Hong Kong recently inspired a lot of different countries, especially people from China. So do you think that we are at the beginning of the new way of democracy? And also, what do you think the reasons behind all those protests around the world? Maybe Jack would like to answer first.
Sure. Are we? The question is, are we at the brink of a fourth wave of democratic movements? Obviously, it's the easy answer is to say that it's too soon to say that. But frankly speaking, I think that we are not on the brink of a fourth wave of democratic movements around the world. I think we face a massive challenge ahead of us in terms of if we actually recognize the depth to which China has influence around the world and its ability to prop up authoritarian regimes that do not face the same amount of pressure from the democratic West that they did before. They're embedded, they're supported, there's strategic corruption. I think things that what happened in Hong Kong is very inspiring, and it is inspiring democratic movements. It's definitely inspiring more engagement with Taiwan today, because the people often say like what happened in Hong Kong is just a trailer to what's about to happen, what would happen in Taiwan in terms of how the CCP would try to exert control there. So I think we are at a point where we have an opportunity there is finally a recognition of what the regime in Beijing is, and there's an opportunity to show that this is actually an ideological struggle that we will be engaged in with Beijing for an extended period of time. To say that we are just on the brink of democracy, a wave of democratic movements, I think not. I think that makes it too easy for us. I think that the challenge ahead of us and recognizing that there is a challenge even is still where we are situated.
I'm very pessimistic, long-term optimistic. And when it comes to China, 10 days ago, I spoke with two missionaries from Africa, where China is doing a lot of business. And they're bringing workers from China to build roads, for example, in Zambia or Kenya or whatever. And they told me stories about how those companies, which are state-run companies, Chinese companies, how they are treating the workers. And it's not that they are treating them badly, they are killing them. And those stories I could not believe, actually. Nobody has any camera to show us that. And even if they had, I don't think that this kind of material or documentary would convince anyone that this is true. It looks unreal, it sounds unreal. And now if you watch this kind of documentary, which was also very shocking to me, that half of the protesters were actually documentary makers in the documentary. Almost everyone had a camera or like a GoPro or a more professional equipment. So there is a ton of like gigabytes of materials from Hong Kong, and it doesn't get through. So there's a firewall that's keeping that away from people. So I don't know if those stories from Africa are 100% sure, because nobody could take a photo. You cannot go there and film it. And still you have so many photographers in Hong Kong, and still with all that material, internet, and you can download those movies or watch them for $1, or as you said, today there are free screenings of that movie, and still people don't know anything about what happens in Hong Kong. So I don't know how does this connects to the Maidan Square in Ukraine. What kind of change is it preparing us for? I'm not really sure. I must say that I'm very pessimistic after watching that documentary, because I don't know what has happened in Hong Kong for the last 3 years. If I wanted to find anything on what happens in Hong Kong, is that there are some Russian oligarchs moving to Hong Kong. So this is the story now in Polish media.
If I could just respond, it's because yes, you get the stories from Africa, you get these little anecdotes. There's for some, and every time you hear it, it sounds like too hard to believe, right? I feel that is a strategy. That there's a strategy of inspiring self-censorship, in universities. There is a strategy to have economic consequences to publishers that publish critical criteria of China, to the point where now the only anecdotes that we get that are coming through are anecdotal. There's just a few of them, to the point where you can just not believe them. You need a consolidation of these stories, right? And so it's like I had some friends of mine from the Maldives who were talking about, they had some crazy stories of, like, the ambassador walking in with like a bag of cash, and we're like, oh, we just heard this. Sounds like a rumor. But I brought them to other people that were studying China and its behavior around the world, other researchers from Kenya, from Nigeria, Ghana, from Thailand and Malaysia. And only when they got together, like, okay, I thought this was just a crazy story, but now after listening to you guys, maybe that's not so crazy after all, right? So it's that but unfortunately, there are systematic things in place that prevent that consolidation to continue to make these stories of the PRC's malign behavior somewhat unbelievable, so that I sound like a hawkish American that just came in here and wants to, like, wage war against China to make sure that we maintain U.S. primacy in a geopolitical contest, which is not what this is about at all. It's about values and ideological struggle. So, yeah, that's the end of my rant there.
Yeah, maybe I will add some points on this topic. Yeah, totally. I'm quite pessimistic as well. Like for the democracy in Hong Kong, also in China. But like in long term, like same with you guys, I'm quite optimistic because like as a Hong Konger, we brought out this idea. We show the world the value of democracy, and we will fight for democracy no matter what it costs. So we believe that this idea will spread across the globe and to inspire different people, maybe especially people from China, because recently there are protests in China against the COVID rule. And there are lots of protesters from China saying on the social media, or even talk to me in person. They say that they were inspired by the people from Hong Kong, the way we protest and the idea we spread. So I'm thinking that we are not that like pessimistic in terms of pursuing democracy, because we have already influenced some people around the world, or people in China. And also talking back to the Ukraine Maidan Square. So we are also, the reason why I was saying that we are inspired by the Ukraine is because back then in 2014, they had a protest, anti-government protest against the pro-Russian regime, and they sacrificed, they also fought in the front line. And during the protest in 2019, because they make also a documentary called Winter on Fire. I'm sure you know about this. And everywhere in Hong Kong in 2019, there were many community screenings playing Winter on Fire. So the protesters in Hong Kong, they watched the documentary, they learned the tactics from the Ukrainian, and they throw Molotovs to the government buildings. So that's why I was saying they inspired us, and this is the power of the documentary and the power of ideas. So what I'm thinking is that with these documentaries showing all around the world and showing to the people in China, so I believe that some of them may be awoken, and someday they will come out to say no to the government. So that's what I'm thinking. Do you want to add something, Jack? Or
yeah. So that's I think that brings up an interesting point. If you say that in your conversations with people in the mainland that they learned from the Hong Kong protests, I think that is exactly what makes Beijing so paranoid in terms of needing to exert control over Hong Kong, be able to control all sources of information inside of China, to prevent that kind of flow of sharing of best practices in terms of how to resist the government. So I'm afraid that the lessons that Beijing has learned from Hong Kong is actually not more liberalization but more repression. So it was pretty the protests that have been happening in China over the last a few weeks ago, the A4 protests have been pretty have been the greatest movements in mainland China since 1989. I think that something interesting happened there, because I've usually been pretty fatalistic in terms of what is the likelihood of something happening in China. I simply assume that the apparatus for repression is simply so strong. But it was in that case in particular that that actually the outside world mattered so much, because the people were using VPNs, taking video, sending it outside of China, keeping it safe, and that way being able to send it back into China. So it's the VPN services that China is the largest black market for, and international servers to be able to keep this evidence that is going to be so important in terms of being able to maybe influence and inspire China moving forward. So it is actually, given that they were eventually able to shut down these protests within about 3 days, and there will be a systematic effort to put all the ringleaders in prison, and then take notes on who else was actually on the street and punish them in their careers over the next 5 to 10 years. There will be a systematic application of consequences for those movements. So yeah, I'm still. It showed us opportunities and openings. However, really we're about to see what this means in the long term, because Xi Jinping isn't going anywhere.
One thing that was not mentioned in that documentary is that during this Polytechnic University riots, just right after the riots, everyone was registered. So everyone who was there is on the list already. So it's like 2047 or 2049. What's the year of 49? Because it's 50 years from...
It's 100 years from the establishment of the People's Republic of China in 1940.
But the transition period of the contract with Margaret Thatcher is 47, because there was a movie 2047 as well. Yeah, so the main tiny difference, but it makes a difference, is that nobody has promised Ukraine to Putin. There was now 1997 agreement that there is like this two-system period transformation moment where after 50 years it's going to be one of Chinese cities. So my question would be, what is the end goal for Hong Kong? Because it's going to be someday, it's going to be, in 25 years, we're going to wake up and it's 2047. And even though China doesn't really care about those details, right? The contracts, they don't give a crap about it already. We already know it. But so what is the goal of Hong Kong? And my question would be, is there really that democratic majority in Hong Kong right now that supports being an independent state? Because I don't see any other option to become like this Asian kind of Andorra, because it is a part of the structure. And so what is the end goal? Becoming a separate nation, or fighting for your sovereignty for 150 years more?
Perhaps I will be the one to answer this question, right? So it is really a tough question, because if you ask different person in Hong Kong, they would definitely have different answer. So the answer on the tables are like to have a democratic Hong Kong and free Hong Kong. There are only two ways, and definitely not under China, because even if China becomes a democracy, we don't really believe that Hong Kong will enjoy our prosperity with China. So the only two ways is either independence or returning to the British rule. That's the two majority opinion among the, I would say, libertarian Hong Kongers feel at the moment. But I think many people would prefer having an independent state. Like, although this advocacy is illegal in Hong Kong because we have the national security law, and advocating independence would be definitely put in prison, like maximum life imprisonment for the penalty. But yeah, I would say that too would be the mainstream opinion. And regarding the population in Hong Kong, so it's a little bit more complex, because no doubt that there are quite a lot of Chinese immigrants from China. Maybe especially in the movie, there are some like pro-Beijing communities or even gangsters. They support the Chinese government. They have that sort of Chinese identities, classify them as Chinese. And I think it's quite popular ideology among the older generations because they are greatly influenced by the Chinese cultures and also the education. But for the younger generation, I think most of us, they don't really like China and they don't really classify themselves as Chinese. So most of us think that we are Hong Konger, and or maybe if they have foreign passport, they classify as Canadian, British, or whatsoever. So the opinion in Hong Kong is quite divided, and from the time being, because there are immigrants from China every day, 150 immigrants from China, like we cannot reject it. It's like a policy signed between the Beijing government and Hong Kong government. So from time being, there will be more like Chinese from China immigrated to Hong Kong. And of course, definitely they would not support the efficacy of Hong Kong independence. And with a lot of us moving to like a foreign country, for example, UK, Australia, and Canada, and there will be less and less population in Hong Kong, like fighting for democracy. Unfortunately, as is mentioned, like at the end of the documentary. So that's basically the situation in Hong Kong right now.
So it's quite gloomy, I would say.
Yeah, definitely. So from what we can do as the overseas, like I would say in exile, because many of us cannot go back to Hong Kong, otherwise would like put in jail. And what we can do is advocating in our countries where we live, and also like to talk with the local public to raise awareness. That's what we can only do, unfortunately, because we are not in Hong Kong. We cannot do anything. Yeah, and even if we are in Hong Kong, we cannot protest, because if we protest, they just put it in jail, just like in China. So that's why we can see like in recent years in Hong Kong, there are not protests anymore, because either we left or we are in jail. Just like there are many political prisoners in Hong Kong, they were charged violating national security law, and they are still waiting for the trial in Hong Kong.
I'm just trying to find some positive path to something that's not finishing with China being your master at the end of the day. So is there any positive option? Is there any program or maybe because you can produce 5 more documentaries and write 50 more books, but what's the program toward saving Hong Kong actually?
What I would say is because like from the time being, we realize Hong Kong is not just a place like in the territory in the south of China. Hong Kong is like an ideology or like an idea. So like Hong Kong is a place where the people belong to. So we can be in Canada, we can be in UK, we can be in Poland, as long as we fight for democracy and we treasure our values. Anywhere can be Hong Kong. So is that like a more positive opinion? And yeah, and also like this is a second part of this topic, like the information revolution, because like we know that the world is changing. Like we are not limited by like by the geographical location. We can be anywhere. We can have a close contact with anyone around the world. So we may think that like with the change of information, we can have a different version of Hong Kong, perhaps like on the internet or like anywhere around the world, as long as we keep our cultures and value. And that's why you can see since the protest in 2019, we have lots of overseas communities, Hong Kong overseas communities supporting Hong Kong, doing protests, organizing screenings like this all around the world to show solidarity with Hong Kong. So with the technology changes, and we are quite optimistic about this.
Okay. Yeah. So I think you touch on a few good things there. I think that the assumption that you will always be able to maintain contact with each other, I think, is a false assumption. There is one thing that as the PRC gains more and more influence in the United Nations, one thing it has been advocating for is the idea of internet sovereignty. The internet is not a global commonplace of ideas where we can communicate with each other, but it's up to each government to determine what information is allowed in and out of their country. Furthermore, in the spreading of internet of telecommunications technology from China, it's also equipping states with the means of controlling that information. So the space actually for free discussion is shrinking, especially as we continue to compete over 5G and 6G generation internet. So it's not just like about, again, this sort of technological thing of the United States' obsession with Huawei and 5G is not just to maintain, market superiority of AT&T, who is not even like a player. It's Ericsson and Nokia that are contenders to Huawei on 5G technology. But the point is that these technological competitions will have an impact on our ability to continue to save that space for free exchange of information. Secondly, so that's just one thing I wanted to highlight. Second, when you talk about like an information campaign, I already talked about the structural impediments to actually launching that, of actually getting buy-in from corporate America, corporate Europe to actually support any kind of information thing like that, or host it on its platforms. That's its own difficulty. But the other difficulty is also, so now within that environment, actually finding people that are able to launch an information campaign to raise awareness about Hong Kong, Taiwan, repression inside of China is also incredibly difficult. Let's say that we simply wanted to have like an information operation in West Africa, or no, East Africa is perhaps a better example here. Number one, there's not enough people there that actually know what's happening in China to be able to launch something like that. All international aid that's going to go in there is only going to be able to work with what is there, so your information campaign will only go so far. Number two, China Daily is providing free free news access to these news services in these poorer parts of Africa in order for them to have international news. Now, that international news is inevitably going to be pro-CCP, positive on China, not actually talk about this type of reporting. So we don't have institutions that are capable of doing the information campaigns on these issues, and then the information space is flooded by free news access from China Daily to weak information environments where there aren't enough critical documentarians to be able to do the type of awareness raising that we need to happen. Does that make sense? Probably not, but
yeah, definitely makes sense. But like I have a different perspective on this issue, because unlike 20 years ago, people only receiving information through state medias or television or newspaper. But nowadays, people get information from internet like Twitter, Instagram, or Telegram. So they or maybe YouTube. So they have different perspectives on different issues. For example, what happened in Hong Kong, we don't usually watch or receive information from the major mainstream media, because they are biased, and also they are manipulated by the state. So we use online forum, we use YouTube, we use Twitter to exchange information. And so as right now in China, they started to not using the Chinese media like TikTok or Weibo, WeChat. So they started to use Telegram or Twitter to get an independent source of information. So I think that will be a change, perhaps, I guess. So yeah, do you want to add something?
It will be a change, but it's coming very slowly, and it can modify into something that we don't really like. So the paradigm has to change. Something has to happen that we are not really able to foresee right now. Just like, Poland in 1918 suddenly reappeared after more than 100 years of non-existing on the map, only because there was a conflict called the Great World War, right? Or the fall of Soviet Union. People like Zbigniew Brzezinski, he wrote a book in 1988 about the future of Soviet Union, the next 50 years of Soviet Union. And he published that book like, I don't know, a week before it collapsed. And it's not because he was stupid. I'm not saying that to diminish, his capabilities. No. So the paradigm has to change. Maybe then, because right now we can sit like that for the next 4 hours and we will not come up with any idea. The ground will shake, and then we have to reset our thinking to it and readapt. Because for the moment, I don't see anything positive coming from China, coming from Russia, or any major players. The European Union seems to be absolutely deaf and blind when it comes to Hong Kong. I try to find what is the reaction of Trump, and what is the approach of Joe Biden toward Hong Kong matters. And I've only found a snippet of Nancy Pelosi saying that, our hearts are with you and we pray for blah, 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 something like that. Yeah.
No, there was a response. It was the Hong Kong Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act, which actually compelled the U.S. government to apply sanctions to the officials in Hong Kong that were complicit to the human rights offenses in Hong Kong. That, and then there was also there's actually a few things that were going on. Then there was I don't know if you saw. Sorry, let me just put this in order. It also limited U.S. exports to Hong Kong that would be used by the police in their efforts to actually quell the protests. Because actually a lot of that tear gas was unfortunately American-made and purchased from U.S. suppliers. So U.S. stopped supply of tear gas, for example. I don't know if you noticed, but one of those armored vehicles driving through the fire on the bridge was a Mercedes armored vehicle, right? So this is where I think that Europe, or definitely Germany, still has further to go in terms of actually limiting export of armored vehicles.
Cars were Toyotas.
Sure, fine. But if we're just talking about what we have that we're capable of doing, one is limiting the exports of those things and making them less powerful, or at least having to buy from China, fine, but not actively enabling them to be suppressive of the people of Hong Kong. But that's So there was and the other thing the United States has done is it's reviewed Hong Kong's special status that it actually has as an international finance hub. It operates with different rules than China does. China is technically a developing country according to WTO laws. Hong Kong is not. It's a free trade city, and so that's why so many international organizations are there. So the United States has threatened to review its status, which would actually threaten that would threaten Hong Kong's special treatment that it gets and force the movement of all of those international finance centers out of Hong Kong and cut China off from sources of international capital. So there have been actually the United States, the U.S. government's response has actually had a good bit of teeth to it, I would say. But however, we're still dealing with a situation where more people need to be brought on board. Wall Street's definitely not brought on board yet. They're still investing heavily in China and Hong Kong, regardless of the direction that the United States government is going.
Yeah, exactly. That's why we have to work harder especially in EU, because there are not many stuff in EU happening towards China in Hong Kong, and also EU, they are, especially in Germany, they are heavily relying on the Chinese economy. So there are lots of to do. And I think we are quite running out of time, so we have to give our time to our audience to see if anyone there's a question. Oh yeah, there. Thank you much.
Hello, Mr. Jack and Mr. Thomas, and some of from China. So I have 3 questions, and one question is for Mr. Jack. So as you know that the A4 revolution is spreading in China, and as your perspective as a Chinese specialist, do you have some good advice for them to accelerate the process of Chinese democratization? Yeah, and I know maybe you were pessimistic about that, but maybe you could have some advice. Yeah, thank you. And for Mr. Thomas, because we know, as we all know, that we also have this solidarity in Poland, and on the 4th of June in 1989, your country changed, and also my country changed, but in different directions. So do you think that Chinese could inherit some experience from the solidarity of Poland? And so the third question for both of you is that, okay, so what we can see that what Russia did to Ukraine, do you think that the world will react the same if China attacks Taiwan? So if the world doesn't react the same like to Russia, what should we do for this? Thank you.
I don't want to come across as a pessimist. I simply am trying to communicate the gravity of the problem, and I think that for most of the people that I talk to don't understand how difficult it actually is to be a democracy advocate in mainland China or in Hong Kong. So excuse me for being so pessimistic. I just want people to understand the gravity of the situation. In terms of advice, I mean, the space for free discussion in the Chinese language, even abroad, inside of China, it's already limited. The space for it abroad is being limited as well. My advice is actually not for the A4 protesters. It's for the people that support the A4 protesters that are outside of China to continue to actually give independent funding to Chinese language news sources to make sure, because to make sure that source of critical discussion is still there. That's also advice I would actually give to governments to write more grants to those outlets. Because that is not happening. So because a lot of the Chinese language news sources have been actually captured by interests of the Chinese market or through other means of coercion, because the editors usually have family members that are still inside of mainland China. So my advice is actually to governments to make sure to at least keep that free discourse open. In terms of that is the most advice I'm able to impart at this time, just because I'm also externally focused. I have some colleagues that might be able to talk to you more about if you wanted to have activism inside of closed societies, or if that's not something I'm able to give you advice on.
Your second question concerning solidarity, right, and inspiration. Let's not forget that solidarity was just a vessel. The social tension was so high that any kind of organization would be used for it. So if you have 40 million people living in Poland, more or less, and at the top moment there was like 10 million people subscribed to Solidarity movement, and it was a workers' union. So it's impossible to have a workers' union with 10 million, members. It's like that. But actually, when it comes to inspiration, Poland was the only country and the first country in the world that has transitioned in the same time from economy that was 90% state-run to a capitalist, private, free market economy. Maybe not 100% free market, libertarian, economy that was still not finished. And we have changed from dictatorship, communist dictatorship, to democracy at the same time. So it was much tougher than transition in 75 in Spain. It was much bigger than Thatcherism in Britain, because when Margaret Thatcher started her privatization, economy in United Kingdom was like 10 to 15% state-run, and Poland was 90%. And you have to also remember that this transformation was not really based on those solidarity movement, points. The program of solidarity was actually, locked away in a drawer because it was no longer valid. So yeah, that was like a stepping point, and it's a great inspiration, but it depends on so many details. As you know, what I'm saying is not really original. It depends on the situation. So China had a huge, I would say, you have changed your economic system from the 70s to 90s towards today, but you still need to change a lot. It's not only the economy. The changing the economy system only gave more power to the government, actually, at the end of the day. Thanks.
I think there's a second question. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so my last question was for both of you. It's like, so as you can see that what Russia did to Ukraine, and how the world reacted to that. So my question for two of you is like, so one day if China attacks Taiwan, and what So do you think the world will react like the same to Russia? So if the world doesn't react like the same to Russia, what should we do for this?
Sure, I can take that. What we have seen is U.S. material, high-tech material, that has been put on the ground in Ukraine, and that's a situation where the United States doesn't actually have a formal defense agreement with Ukraine and still offered it very, very significant support. We have had a very ambiguous relationship with Taiwan since 1979. It's not a defense treaty. However, there's still a provision of arms to Taiwan, and likely, if there is some kind of attack on Taiwan, there will likely be high-tech U.S. material deployed to the battlefield as well. If not, or it is the U.S. Indo-Pacific Command is reorienting its posture for a potential Taiwan contingency. I cannot say whether or not they would respond. However, it's just mostly a chessboard to demonstrate that they can respond if they want to, and that's enough to deter China's action. What would Europe do? I think that we've seen a pretty limited. We've seen a huge outpour of sympathy from Poland to Ukraine. We've seen a fairly limited response from Germany to Ukraine. And this fairly limited response is even though that there is literally a ground war on continental Europe. So what happens when there's a war around the world? That's much more difficult to say until there's economic impact of losing access to 70% of the world's supply of semiconductors. Perhaps, however, that will have economic impacts that might spur action. However, in terms of outpour of sympathy from Germany, I think that that's probably unlikely. And German inaction usually results in European inaction.
And yes, next question.
I'm from Hong Kong, but I spent about 10 years in Hong Kong. As a teenager, I spent another 10 years in the UK, and the last 10 years in Central and Eastern Europe. So first of all, I came to the conclusion that this is probably the freest region in the world right now. I'm pessimistic about the situation for a slightly different reason, because I've come to the realization that if you are going to be anti-China, you kind of have to be pro-US, pro-Western. You don't really have another choice. And that means supporting a regime, if we want to use this word, that also does a lot of questionable things, right? Like the wars that the US have waged in the Middle East and the suppression of freedom in Western countries, right? Canadians who protested had their bank accounts locked up. They even had their pets taken away from them. And in the UK, where I lived and where I knew what happened, and if you say the wrong thing on Twitter, sometimes the police would even come and visit you. So this is like the moral dilemma I have, that and maybe that's just a political reality, that to be anti-China, you have to align yourself with regimes that do also questionable things. So, yeah.
My response there is that democracy is a process, right? It is. I'm sure that you've probably heard this before. I don't think it's a cop-out still, though. We have the opportunity for discussing our errors. We know that human behavior is to try to take and consolidate power, and for that reason, we've created democratic governments in order to prevent tyrants from being able to take and maintain control. So I think that we'll always have instances of governments doing bad things, of limiting their rights, but we will always have the ability to kind of shed light on them and have course correction. So I don't think that just saying I don't think you have to say I don't think we have to be perfect in order to still say that we are worth. In order to say that what the CCP is doing is bad. That's just a qualification. Also, I don't think it's the West. I think perhaps we should stop saying West, because South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan are definitely a part of this, and as are other Southeast Asian democracies. This is a collective democratic community, and it's. I think when we say the West, that actually feeds into China's the PRC's messaging that democracy is somehow a Western import, that it's actually grafting the United States definition of human rights onto a political situation where it does not apply, as though they're not fundamental. So I think we should stop saying West. It's a democratic community, and these are fundamental. And that way, it's easier to defend fundamental values. And then also, you don't have to be pro-U.S. You can just be pro-Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. I hope that.
So yeah, last question because we are running out.
Thank you. I think that's one of the reasons for why the information is so thinly spread in the West about what's happening in China, what has been happening in Hong Kong, is the language barrier, which is one big factor. However, there is another important factor right now that we have observed during the recent protests in China, that actually some Western companies like Apple have been collaborating with the CCP to stifle this contest, to try to avoid this information reaching the audience. The wider audience has been giving some technological assistance to the Communist Party to actually stop the Chinese people from being able to communicate, to cooperate, to share what is happening with the rest of the world and with other people in China. What would you say about this? Do you think it's a significant influence? Thank you.
Do you want to go first? Let's talk about Apple first. I'm pretty sure that Mark Zuckerberg will be dragged into Congress and have to answer to his actions if that is indeed the case. So I think that this is where it's very important that governments have export controls in terms of being able to determine what technology is able to be imported by the PRC. Because there are a lot of what we would call dual-use technologies that the West, in fact, has actually sold to the PRC that has strengthened its surveillance state. China's surveillance state is built by Western technology. So what we need to do is we need to put laws in place that limit the export of those technologies. However, that would require these governments to say that the PRC is a bad actor. So we're not quite at that point where other governments have adopted export controls. The United States the United States has only just started adopting them a little bit more aggressively. However, it's mostly been focused on semiconductor technology. Limiting the export of dual-use technology such as facial recognition technology or cameras and things that build a modern-day smart city, that's right now a very gray area because democracies operate by the thought that they have to use the least intrusive means, so they can't just stop everything. They want to try to find a very clear definition. You cannot export these things, but no one actually has a good definition of what dual-use technology is yet, because they don't know how the technology will be used once it's imported by China.
And you meant Tim Cook, right? You said Zuckerberg.
Yeah, sorry, Tim Cook. Yeah, Zuckerberg. There's no Facebook in China, as a matter of fact. But actually, Facebook was ready to launch a modified version of Facebook inside of the PRC, which is a tragedy.
I think that's all for today's discussion because we are running out of time, a bit overrun. So thank you everyone for coming today's screening, and also thank you our guests coming to share your opinions. It's like a unique experience to all of our audience. And after the screening, we will staying at the cafe for a little bit longer. If you want to come and have a chat with us, feel free to come. And yeah, that's all for today. And thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.